Oh boy, it's the best time of the year. Christmas time. I mean, seriously, look at how awesome everything is. There's snow all over the ground, if you're anywhere other than Western North Carolina. Oh, hey, look, there's a reindeer. Shit, never mind. That's one of the elk they reintroduced over there in the Cherokee area. And, boy, he had a lot to drink. That is a substantial amount of urine. Hey, the elk are just as great as any old reindeer. And we got a ton of things to be excited about. Fellowship, sportsmanship, the Fellowship of the Rings. But, why is it starting to sound like Woodstock is happening again? What in the heck? What is that?
Ho, ho, ho!
No way!
Merry Christmas to everyone!
You gotta be kidding me! Santa Claus?
Ha ha ha! That's right, Caleb. And guess what?
What is it, Santa?
You've been a little asshole this year.
What are you talking about? I haven't been bad.
Oh, is that right? Well, do you want to explain to me why you're always talking about ghosts and goblins and scary things and scaring the living crap out of children? That isn't very nice. I would say, in fact, that's a bit naughty.
I'm sorry, but I'm gonna have to disagree with you there, Santa. You know, as somebody who up until literally 5 seconds ago for me, I would classify to be existing in the same realm of mythology as all the things I typically talk about on this podcast with the Dr. Captain, I think you're sounding slightly hypocritical. And also, what's up with this music?
Why, don't you already know, Caleb? It's this very episode of the podcast where you're trying to tie all of this mythology surrounding me to very naughty things, like the use of recreational hallucinogens.
Dude, the timeline doesn't even add up. The podcast episode hasn't even started yet. How do you even know that?
Because I'm Santa Claus, bitch! I know when you've been naughty. I know when you've been nice. Why don't you think I would know exactly what your podcast is insinuating about me?
Well, you kind of do have a point there. But all that said...
I'm totally messing with you, Caleb. Even I like a good prank every once in a while. But given the psychedelic nature of the discussion today, I thought this music would be fitting. But in truth, you and the Dr. Captain Burgess are good little boys, relatively speaking. And for your efforts this year, keeping myths like myself and Chupacabra alive.
Well, we never actually did an episode about Chupacabra.
Shut up, I'm trying to give you a compliment. I will now award you with your Christmas present.
Oh boy, well, what is it?
Your very own Christmas tree lava lamp.
You know what? Fitting.
You're damn right it's fitting. I'm Santa Claus. I know what everyone wants and also deserves for Christmas.
Well, thanks so much, Santa. I honestly, genuinely really love this. But I better start this episode of Ghosts in the Mountains or the people on YouTube will start to say that Austin and I are droning on too long.
I wouldn't worry about them, Caleb. Those people are buttholes. And you and the Dr. Captain, neither Doctor nor Captain Burgess, are trying your best. And that's all that matters.
Well, I certainly appreciate the words of encouragement, Santa, and hey, Merry Christmas.
And a Merry Christmas to you, you little asshole!
I thought you said I was a good boy this year.
I did, I'm kidding! Come on! Forget about it! And Merry Christmas, everyone! And stay spooky! Ha ha! Holy Jesus Christ, a flock of Canadian geese! Ah! Whew! Good maneuvering, Rudolph, that was a close one.
The Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest in the world, and we just happen to live in them. One thing we can tell you, there are ghosts in the mountains. Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Ghosts in the Mountains. I am your host, as always, Caleb Hanks and my Yuletide brethren, Dr. Captain Austin Burgess, is here in the Chewbacca position, or as some people would say, riding shotgun in the Millennium Falcon. How are you doing tonight, brother?
I am doing just merry tonight. How are you?
Oh, good Lord. It's one of the most magical times of the year that isn't Halloween. And, man, I'm celebrating the co's. I got a lava lamp upstairs that's a Christmas tree, as you saw.
Oh, I saw.
And that's really setting the vibe for me this year.
I think I might have to go order myself one.
I think it's also really perfect that I would get a psychedelic Christmas tree on the day that we record this episode in particular, because, buddy, let me tell you, I could not be more excited about this particular episode because it's something I've heard about for a very long time. But the topic is that some people out there in the world seem to think that there is some sort of connection between the wacky, wonderful, arm-waving tube men of Mother Nature, the psychedelic mushroom, or mushrooms in general, and the connection with, well, our Yuletide friends, Santa, the elves, and the reindeer, and probably a lot more stuff that you're going to tell us all about. But, I mean, like, you didn't know too much about this, right?
You completely brought this one to my attention. Like, this has somehow gone over my head or just outside of my my purview for my entire life. You mentioned this is something that we should look into, and the more I found it, I think I mentioned to you that everyone was like, "Oh yeah, my hippie friend told me about this," and I didn't believe him, so I looked into this. I'm like, how the hell have I not heard this until now? So
yeah, I mean, honestly, you are so deeply seated in a lot of the mythos and the folklore and the weird stuff. It's always interesting for me when there's one that slipped past you somehow. So
yeah, for sure.
That was fun for me to check out. But all I had ever really heard about this was just very surface level. Like, some people think that there is some sort of connection with this. But as always, our scuba instructor himself, Dr. Captain Burgess, has done a number on it this time, and you have gone into the deepest, darkest, anglerfish-filled depths of strangeness, just uncovering the potential reality about this. Because I think that this entire subject, as you were explaining to me briefly before the show, has become a bit of a point of contention between historians and mushroom enthusiasts.
Yeah, I mean, there's other scholars that are completely on the side of the mushroom psychedelic origins of Santa story connection, that if we want to call it. But there are a lot of people on the opposite end of that, more from the by the books, if it's not in recorded, documented history, it didn't happen, who believe that this is just another piece of folklore. And, I think as I was digging into it, I really bounced back and forth the whole time, and, ultimately landed in a pretty interesting place, but we'll get there later.
Right. Well, like, mushrooms in general are very, very, very weird and interesting organisms in general. Mm-hmm. They function a lot differently than a lot of other biological organisms on the planet. There's a lot of people that think that mushrooms were actually left on the planet from the aliens that seeded us on this planet.
Yep.
And they are used as a cell phone to call mommy. They are used as a, some sort of thing to where we ingest the psilocybin.
You tap into a sort of consciousness you didn't know existed.
Yeah. So I love the idea that this, this potentially ties Santa Claus to the aliens. And I mentioned on an episode a little while back, I hit my head one time and I had this vision, much like Doc Brown, where I was like, ooh, Christmas with aliens. Dude, was I tapping into something archetypal that was deep in my software that the aliens left me with?
Maybe so. And we might have more on that next week if you stay tuned.
Yeah, who knows? But man, I could not be more excited to hear what you found on this stuff. So let's go ahead and jump into this. Dude, okay, where do we start with the mushrooms somehow being influential to, of all things, Christmas?
Yeah, so the theory that these mushrooms, or a certain particular mushroom, in fact, ties back to Christmas is a kind of fairly recent theory, I would say, at least in the modern terms or modern world. It didn't come along until 1976 when ethnobotanist Jonathan Ott was the first one to link this specific mushroom to just a bunch of various Christmas motifs or traditions, if you will.
Is it the red cap?
Yeah, it's the red cap. So it's pronounced. Let me get this right because it's kind of a mouthful here. The
Who's the mushroom whose name looks like a frickin' eye exam?
I mean, this one's pretty close. I feel like a lot of them are probably out there, but this one is the Amantia muscaria.
An Okia from Muskokia.
Yeah. So we could just go with the red cap mushroom, so we don't have to keep repeating that mouthful. But yeah, that's the technical scientific name for it. And
All right.
like you mentioned, these are the red cap mushrooms, the ones with the white spots on them.
Right.
And they're commonly found in forest under like spruce or pine trees. And they're, if you know them, you see what we're talking about. They're super bright red with the little tiny white dots. People kind of associate it with like Alice in Wonderland, or even Mario kind of draws some influence from this specific mushroom.
Yeah.
But you also kind of get some folklore tie-in with a lot of imagery of gnomes around some of these red cap mushrooms. And you even have ties to some of the fae or fairy lore specific to this species of mushroom, I guess you could say.
I always end up thinking about turtles because, and maybe that's also a Mario connection, but whenever I would find red caps down in the woods in the place where I grew up, turtles would always just be eating the hell out of them. I'd always see these little spots where the turtles had eaten them.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah.
Turtles are having a good time. Or maybe they're one of those ones that, isn't affected by the compounds.
That I don't know, but I do know turtles like to eat mushrooms.
Yeah, for sure.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's some tripping turtles out there.
Right.
So.
But like if you're not super familiar with what we're talking about, like if you've ever been to like a Spencer's Gifts and you gone and flipped through the black light poster, you've probably seen one of these things.
Oh yeah, dude! Wow, you just unlocked a freaking memory of me when I was 12. Like, why do people care about mushrooms so much?
Right?
Like, why is there
I guess they look cool.
Why is there so much artwork about these things?
Little did you know.
Yeah, back then I was like, I don't want to eat vegetables. Screw this. Screw these people and their weird cult.
It might have had some Santa ties.
That's true.
But yeah, I guess the first-hand accounts of this specific mushroom being used for psychedelic purposes date back to the 18th century with a translated journal that was published in English around 1736. So use of this mushroom in, older cultures is something that is well documented. This is something that people used in recreational and ritualistic purposes.
Right, yeah.
In 1967, there was an amateur scholar named Gordon Wasson, and he published a book arguing that the red cap mushroom, the Amantia muscaria, was used in ancient ceremonies by shamans in the Far East. So he's the one that really published this theory, linking it to ancient ritualistic shamanistic practices. And that's really kind of where everything starts to kind of take root from as far as the Christmas origins go.
Take root. I get it.
So you can actually trace this back to ancient Siberia and other just older ancestral communities in that area. And really, it really originates around the winter solstice, something we talked about in a few episodes, probably particularly the Krampus episode and some of the older pre-Christian ties to Christmas. And as we mentioned before, winter solstice occurs on December 21st. And for these Siberian cultures, this was a really ceremonial and festive date. Rituals were conducted that were guided by shamans who would collect these mushrooms, which, don't know if we mentioned, have some pretty powerful hallucinogenic properties.
Boom, baby.
Yeah, now that might be a big piece of the story here. But I guess that supposedly the toxicity on these mushrooms was so potent or so high that when ingested, it would make people sick. So they're sitting here basically vomiting, not able to stomach it before they getting the real effects from it, if you will.
Wow.
So before consuming them, they had to dehydrate these mushrooms. And a lot of the methods they would use to do this kind of line up with some Christmas traditions. They would use branches of pine tree to stick the mushrooms to dry them out, to, drain the potency, decrease the potency to make them ingestible. And some people think that hanging ornaments on a Christmas tree is a direct reference to this.
I am so naive to the hallucinogenic mushroom culture because I'm just, that's a speed a little too fast for me. So do you know, like typically when people get mushrooms for recreational use to hallucinate, do they have to do that same thing where they dilute the potency of them?
They are dried out. I will say that.
Okay.
I don't know if that's, I can't say from
Yeah. I'm
I don't know how I know that.
I'm
But
trying to out my bro here, brother. My buddy likes taking little trips and getting crazy.
no, they do come dried out. So I think that is a pretty common practice.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know if that's necessarily to decrease the toxicity, to decrease the potency, but one way or another, it's
basically the same process.
same process.
Yeah.
There's also some notes to other ways that these were dried out back in these ancient Siberian times. And one of them is they would put them in socks. And then they would put the socks over the fireplace, over the fire.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah.
Weird.
Yeah. So you see where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
The stockings over the fireplace, stockings pretty much have become a mainstay in Christmas tradition. And this was some sort of just little, what do you want to call it, influence or just motif, archetype, whatever you want to call it, that kind of lines up with the Christmas tradition.
That is crazy as hell, dude.
Yeah. So whether that was the direct influence of the stocking tradition or just maybe some other random coincidence, I think is a little bit up for debate. But still, I think it's interesting enough that's worth noting, if nonetheless.
I bet the guy that invented stockings did a lot of other weird stuff too.
Probably so. And I also should mention here that these mushrooms, they grew at the base of conifers or pine trees, which some people believe ties back to Christmas presents being left under the tree.
Yeah, I mean, so that spawns another question for me. It's like, okay, if that isn't the origin of the Christmas tree, what is? Why did we start putting trees in the house?
Yeah, well, I'll get more into a lot of this. And
Hell yeah.
I think most questions that you've asked, we will at least tie back to in this.
Dope.
But yeah, I do think that's a pretty interesting coincidence because there is a bit of a theory that the mushrooms themselves were the gift. So it's kind of like the gift being left under the tree is sort of a tradition that carried on in different forms across cultures and across time.
Dude, that is so weird. And then that also makes me think about this whole idea of like, the aliens left us something.
yeah,
It's like,
exactly. There's your gift.
did the aliens create Christmas? What the hell is going on?
Man, you might be onto something.
Thanks, aliens. I love Christmas.
So, weirdly enough, and we're already weird, so we might as well keep going with this.
Hell yeah, let's get weirder.
So reindeer play a role in this theory. I think we kind of touched on this, and I don't think you knew the full extent of this one. This one's pretty funny because they were actually used to reduce the toxicity of the mushrooms themselves, because they were able to ingest these red caps without suffering the venomous effects. Something in their stomach, their system neutralized that effect that was basically toxic to humans. And I don't know who figured this out or what processes they went through, but at some point, a human discovered that if he consumed reindeer urine that had been filtered out after the reindeer had consumed the red cap mushrooms, the urine would still contain components that would retain the hallucinogenic effect.
Now, here's the thing. The guy that's drinking reindeer piss the first time, fine. What I think is a bit more interesting is the conversation where he convinces the other person to do it. Brother, I'm telling you what. You want to have a wild night? Drink this reindeer piss.
And then he's like, I don't know, I tried it didn't work. And then they had to figure out, well, you got to feed it this mushroom first.
Yeah.
And then
I drank like 6 gallons of reindeer piss, dude, and I didn't feel anything.
yeah, man, that guy's an asshole.
Well, at least I like the taste.
Fat Mike's Christmas.
Yeah, oh my God. If you know, you know.
So, allegedly, after the shaman would ingest the mushrooms or have drunk the urine of the reindeer, the hallucinations and reactions to the mushroom would begin. And they would feel just these feelings of overwhelming joy. They would have a desire to sing or feelings of being able to fly. They almost feel like they had this just physical empowerment that they could do any task that they wanted to perform. And that's where a lot of people kind of come in. There's a nickname for this mushroom, kind of alluding to the sensation of flying. And I think that kind of ties back to a lot of the other lore of Santa Claus flying through the air. And it also ties back to other little motifs from Christmas, the feelings of joy in the air, the desire to sing. Christmas carols kind of have a little bit of a influence, or this would allegedly have an influence on Christmas carols.
Yeah.
Or Christmas caroling, I should say.
I am. Well, the other thing that I'm wondering is Rudolph's nose.
There is actually a quote that I pulled from someone who argued for this theory, arguing on the imagery of Rudolph's nose.
Okay. I'm excited to hear it.
Yeah. So it's I think a lot of the things that you see kind of blend into the color palette that's associated with Christmas can really be tied back to this. Because, red and white, I guess green's in there too, but those have kind of become the official colors of Christmas.
Red, white, and green 100% are. I
Yeah.
mean, you got the green of the tree, and then the stem of the white of the thing, and then the red cap. I mean...
Yeah. So the legend says that during their trips, the shamans could see into their community's future. They could turn into animals and fly towards the North Star in search of knowledge to share with the rest of their people. And at the end of this hallucinogenic experience, they would then return to their group in their yurt, which is kind of the type of housing they had back then. And they would meet with the townspeople to begin what was known as the solstice ceremony. And to kick off the ceremony, they would basically share their vision and what they learned from this trip with the community is almost seen as like gifts or guidance from above.
Group hallucinating, right?
Yeah.
I've mentioned before how the comedian Bill Hicks and a couple of friends of his all were taking mushrooms together and described seeing the same thing, like hallucinating, seeing a mothership.
Yeah.
Like literally a frickin' UFO. It's very strange how...
Christopher O'Brien has some pretty damn similar stories, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, it's whether it's this thing of people actually seeing the same thing or just talking about it while they're hallucinating.
Like you're tapping into a shared wavelength or something, or shared thought wave.
Yeah, well, either way, it's like whether people are verbally influencing each other or actually in tandem seeing something that isn't there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's kind of an interesting thing to look into, because even from the perspective of the thought processes that groups of people tend to trend towards while they are under the influence of this stuff, because it's like, maybe one of the guys was like, man, look at that star. It looks like a mothership or something like that. And then they all kind of start thinking on this. And I don't know. Either way, I don't know enough about this stuff, but I do think it is strange the archetypal paths that we start to go down.
Oh yeah,
when we're in these states,
for sure. And like I said, these psychedelic trips that the shamans were going on, they were believed to relate back to this idea of Santa Claus basically traveling in his sleigh with the reindeer through the skies as he's delivering gifts. But the gifts that the shaman were given was this knowledge that the mushrooms kind of imparted in them, and then being able to share these gifts among their community was almost just like the shaman was that archetypal Santa Claus figure for the community.
Able to just like fly through the cosmos and spread the word of this incredible communication method. That is crazy, dude.
Exactly. And there's a quote that I have here from anthropologist, and he's an instructor at Sierra College. His name is John Rush, and he has a lot of theories on this. He's one of the big proponents or modern day proponents of the psychedelic Santa theory, if you will. And he says that Santa is a modern counterpart of a shaman who consume mind-altering plants and fungi to commune with the spirit world. So basically what I just said in a different, little bit more far-out twist from John Rush.
Yeah, but, you're a doctor and a captain, but, he's the scholar in this scenario. Take it from him and Austin.
I mean, I think that, what he's tapping into is exactly what I said, that Santa really is just this kind of archetypal figure, and I won't get too much into that because I've got a lot more to say on that. But I will say that Siberian shamans weren't the only mushroom-eating medicine men known in history. There was the Sami or the Sami people, I believe. Maybe it's Sami, S-A-M-I.
I'd say Sami.
Sami?
Probably.
Yeah. Well, they were kind of in the area of Lapland and northern Finland, and they also share stories of healing through gift-giving while drying psychedelic mushrooms on trees. And Matthew Salton writes in the New York Times, an all-knowing man who defies space and time, flying reindeer-drawn sleds, climbing down the chimney, the giving of gifts, the tales of the Sami shaman have it all.
Wild, man.
So, yeah, he's kind of basically saying that these same motifs that we talked about from the Siberian shamanistic traditions also show up in these Sami shamanistic practices as well, that all kind of relate back to the idea of Santa Claus or some of these traditions that are still practiced today during Christmas season.
Man, that is so interesting. It's like this whole thing, the whole reason that we all go out and spend money could potentially be because of this. It's kind of weird. If this is the actual origin of where the gift giving thing came from, boy, did we bastardize the hell out of this. This is supposed to be this incredible, like, mind expanding thing where we all become one and we have like all this connectivity. And now it comes out where people are literally fighting people in the streets for a tickle me Elmo.
Hallmark got a hold of it and you saw the rest.
Like, this shaman expanded my mind and I was able to understand the universe in ways I never could before. And all I got for him was a remote control electric fan. I feel like such an ass.
You're not wrong there. But I mean, like, to me, some of these theories kind of make sense. Like, there's a lot of parallels that, if nothing else, if they weren't influential on Christmas traditions, they were definitely some sort of archetype that was happening alongside some of this going on while these pre-Christian, whatever you want to call them, Yule practices were kind of forming. And I think that there's something to be said about that. I kind of mentioned some of these, I bounce back and forth on, like, the validity on some of this. And I'll dig a little bit more into that because there are people like Tim Frandy, the assistant professor of Nordic studies at the University of British Columbia. And he's also a member of the Sami descendant community in North America. So he does have ties to that culture. And he strongly disagrees with anyone or any proponent of the psychedelic Santa theory.
Well, does he have any explanations that you found that go into why we had some of these things that have become like popular Christmas lore? The tree, the flying reindeer, Santa, the colors, all of that stuff.
Some of it he does, and some of it he just writes off as basically that. We have another origin to explain that, so this can't be the origin of it.
Right.
And I think his main argument on a lot of this really kind of stands in there's no recorded documented history from the Siberian, the Sami people that this was happening. And
that don't mean it ain't real, brother.
Exactly. And I think there's something to be said about that. So that's kind of where a lot of I kind of bounce back and forth on this. But according to him, the story of Santa emerging from Sami shamanistic tradition has a critical number of flaws. Sami people have widely criticized the theory as stereotypical and problematic, basically alluding to a romanticization and misreading of the actual Sami culture. So what I take from that is that there's people that maybe misinterpreted some of the shamanistic practices, some of the psychedelic, hallucinogenic, ritualistic interpretations. And basically he and some of the other people in this culture view this as stereotypical and almost, problematic, in that it's painting a negative stereotype on the people that they don't want to be associated with.
Right. Okay.
So from that standpoint, I get it. I'm not trying to be culturally disrespectful on this, but again, all I'm doing is just presenting two sides of the coin here. I'm trying to remain pretty neutral while I lay all this out, and then I'll kind of get into my own personal feelings on this while, still trying to remain sensitive to the cultures on it.
Well, I will just say, from somebody that doesn't know like anything more than just what I just have learned about this stuff, when you put it together in the way that you have with tying the parallels to stuff like that, I think it's very easy. If that's the only side of the story you've ever heard, I think it's very, very easy to think that that's where it all came from.
Yeah, for sure. But he goes on to say, while it's possible and even likely that the Sami people formerly used this red cap mushroom, it is unlikely that it had any meaningful impact on Christmas lore that spread into Europe and across the world. Which, okay, fair enough. Maybe he's saying that he's not arguing that this didn't necessarily, it wasn't something that wasn't happening. He's saying that these practices didn't directly influence what became Santa Claus today. And sure, I could accept that. That's a valid argument. It goes on, the only time that Frandy has seen a Sami shaman in particular connected to these red cap mushrooms was when basically an old historian in the 1940s claimed that someone used this mushroom in 7 different spots, and that was documented in something from the 1940s that was kind of traced back through what I could only interpret as oral tradition. So it's really hard to say where that really comes into effect. But he goes on to say that growing up Swedish and Sami, I never heard of any mushroom association with Christmas until IKEA started selling mushroom decorations for Christmas trees. And he goes on to say that these mushrooms emerge in September in the land that this would have allegedly occurred in. And by December, they're long gone and covered under the snow. So just from a practical standpoint, if we're talking about this happening in or around the winter solstice of December 21st, that these mushrooms would be long out of season, and the practicality of finding one on Christmas Day or even winter solstice is pretty impractical.
Does that have to matter, though? Because when you think about the practice of them harvesting the mushrooms, and mushrooms do kind of go batshit in the fall time.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
So they're harvesting the mushrooms in the fall. They're drying them out, which I don't know how long that takes.
Yeah.
So it might be a thing to where around that time, for Christmas is when they're ready to
consume.
Boom.
Yeah, you're right. And that's kind of goes back to just because they're found under a tree doesn't necessarily mean you find them under a tree on the day of winter solstice, the day of Christmas. Yeah. They're found under a tree and then dried out, whether that's on a branch, over a fire, and then you have them to consume during the winter solstice celebration. So yeah, you perfectly unraveled that one.
Well, the other thing about it too is like, what are you going to do when it's cold and you're like sit in your shelter all the time? It's like, I'm going to trip balls. I'm going to see Santa Claus.
Yeah. So yeah, as you can see, there's some things that kind of sway the needle back that direction, but
sorry, guy. I mean, look, we're not trying to be disrespectful in any way to anybody's understanding or, how they think that Christmas came to be. We are simply posing the questions because there is potentially evidence that this is some sort of, maybe not written, but maybe some sort of thing that's just been a thing that's so long ago started taking place that, somehow did subtly influence these things.
Yeah. But, like I said, unfortunately, a lot of historians feel that because there is not that documented record from Siberian mushroom use that kind of translated into or influenced specific like European and even American traditions that kind of created Santa, they feel that this is something that could be maybe not written off, but just can't be proved. So they just kind of leave it alone as something that they're not going to touch. They know where the historical origins are, and they can't find any documented proof from this era. So they're not going to take any of this as worthy of exploring, I guess. To me, I think the parallels are pretty interesting, but
I agree.
Historians feel that they're more coincidental in their words. And, if there's one thing we've kind of explored on this is when you get those weird coincidences that seem kind of especially meaningful, well, we kind of refer to those as synchronicities.
Yeah.
And a lot of those synchronicities almost represent shared archetypes that exist across the world a lot of times.
Look, I'm not going to sit here and say that somebody that was a big fan of mushrooms and psychedelics couldn't be going down, a rabbit hole in their own mind and also have some knowledge of this stuff.
Yeah.
Like looking into the history of the use of mushrooms and then kind of start tying those things together on their own and then kind of start talking about it. That right there might actually be how this became a thing.
Enough. Yeah. You convinced yourself and
exactly.
then
And the parallels just happen to line up so well that it becomes a thing and the buzz starts going in the community. I'm not going to sit here and say that that's not a possibility.
Yeah.
But I still think that the parallels between the whole thing are pretty uncanny.
Yeah. It's a good way to put it. So yeah, let's just go back to some of these parallels just to recap on a lot of this before we go into. Hey. Obviously, you have the visual overlaps, the color scheme, like Santa Claus's red suit with white trim matches the mushroom's red cap and the white spots. Like we said, like red is basically the official color of Christmas with some white and green thrown in there.
Let me jump in on Rudolph. Rudolph, his nose is already red, but when it lights up, that is the red cap is the nose, but when it lights up is when it activates.
Ooh, interesting. I'll hop back to that very shortly.
This is how these things get started when people are on mushrooms.
So there's someone named Carl Ruck who is a classics professor at Boston University, and he claims that shaman would, dress up to almost emulate or mimic the mushroom appearance during these winter solstice rituals. And there is actually a more modern photo of someone basically in a shamanistic practice dressed up in a a red suit with some white dots all over it, holding one of these red cap mushrooms. So whether that tradition came later in modern times or whether that's something that's been passed down and practiced for a long time, either way, Ruck argues that this is what the shamans of the time were emulating when they were going through these psychedelic rituals. They were dressed in these red and white suits.
Dear God, it's the smoking gun.
Alluding to them being the precursor to the notorious red and white Santa suit.
Oh, there you go. This just keeps getting deeper, dude.
Yeah. And then you go back to them being found under trees. That's the other common theory, that the mushroom are found under pine trees, which is kind of why we use the conifers, the pine trees, to represent or embody an element of Christmas. And on top of that, much like presents on Christmas morning, that's where these gifts, if you will, were found.
Is a conifer just a pine cone bearing tree?
Yeah, kind of.
I don't think I've ever heard of that term. Conifer. It's like Connie and Jennifer mixed together. Conifer.
There's probably a more accurate description, but that's basically what I'm gonna.
How did that name not take off in the 80s?
Yeah. So yeah, this goes along with one of the interpretations of the story that the mushrooms themselves are given out as gifts to the community by the shaman. And there's one interpretation that I mentioned on that is that the shaman would travel from house to house in the winter, and the doors he would often find were blocked off by a bunch of snow. So the shaman would have to enter the yurt through the small opening in the top that they would use to let the smoke out.
What the hell, dude?
Thus giving inspiration for Santa using chimneys to enter the home.
Well, it makes a hell of a lot more sense to me than Saint Nick just hanging out on somebody's roof.
Right.
That was one that just never sat well with me. I also love the idea of this shaman just walking around like, here you go, kids. Get high. Get high as a giraffe's ass. Here you go.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's really documented if he was giving them out to the children, but that is part of Santa lore, so who knows?
That's what I'm saying. It's like Santa doesn't really bring the grown-ups presents, where the shaman just like, hey, you're 8, here, take some mushrooms. That's incredible, dude.
This will expand your mind real quick, little boy.
This will make you smarter right here. Eat this.
Obviously, you have the tie-in with the tree ornaments, the way the mushrooms were dried out on the tree branches, paralleling with using decorations on a Christmas tree. Like the IKEA mushroom ornaments, yeah, they're a thing, but it's a broader tradition past mushrooms. But I can see how this is a way of, you see something hanging on a branch, kind of evokes some of that festive imagery.
Yeah.
And then obviously the stocking tradition. I mean, that just speaks for itself. I don't know how much more we need to say on that.
I mean, okay, dude, you've got me going into conspiracy mode. But when people, way back in the day, people would like make little altars and offerings for different deities and things. I wonder if the practice of decorating the Christmas tree was making some sort of artistic offering to the harbinger of this gift.
This was literally the next quote I had written down in my notes from author James Arthur. He wrote, "Mushrooms and Mankind, the Impact of Mushrooms on Human Consciousness and Religion." And he says that the decorated Christmas trees and gifts wrapped in red and white paper placed below the tree themselves are symbols of the symbiosis between the conifer and the red cap mushroom itself.
Man, I'm better than I thought I am.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's a pretty strong statement to make, but speaking from a ritualistic, a very spiritual, a very, ties back to nature standpoint, I mean, you've got two biological things that you're drawing that same connection back to. So I think that's a pretty interesting way to look at it.
It's so funny because, again, I'm not trying to crap on these scholars' ideas that this is not connected, but the parallels are just too crazy, man.
There's a lot of them. And just to simply write it off by saying that, well, they didn't write this down, so this is clearly not the case. Like, let's not pretend that a lot of things weren't lost in translation from the ancient world.
No shit.
So, I mean,
seriously.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's kind of going down its own little rabbit hole with that. So there are actual ethnographic reports of humans drinking reindeer urine, especially after mushroom ingestion, for a cleaner psychedelic effect.
Okay.
That was a practice that actually happened, allegedly.
I don't know what ethnographic means, but I'm assuming this is like
The study of ancient cultures,
Okay.
of ancient communities.
Does it line up with the time that this was supposedly going on?
I mean, I don't know if they have an exact example from that time, but the tradition of that was something that, or the practice of that was something they were able to pull from oral tradition of that culture.
The smoking piss-covered gun.
Yeah, and I mean, you think about it, reindeer, they're common in Siberia and Northern Europe, and they'll kind of go and nibble on mushrooms, as you alluded to. The nature finds fungi in its own way, but actually, his name is Donald Pfister, a Harvard University biologist who studies fungi, suggested that some of these Siberian tribesmen who would ingest the reindeer urine would, have maybe hallucinated that these reindeer were flying after kind of partaking in the hallucinogens themselves, which maybe the experience wasn't them flying themselves, but they're whatever consuming this psychedelic and kind of just looking at this reindeer that helped them filter it out, I guess, and then they start seeing it fly.
Or the idea that the reindeer made me fly, so therefore the source, the reindeer, can probably fly itself. Now, one of my favorite films ever, The Broken Lizard Crew's Beer Fest.
Okay.
Cloris Leachman in that movie has a line where she says, "My ancestors drank ram's piss on mountaintops forever, and I tell you what, if you could drink ram piss, you can drink about anything." And now I'm starting to wonder if there was maybe a little some truth to that.
Maybe that ram was filtering something out for them. Who knows?
Yeah. Hell.
But jumping back to Professor Ruck, who is one of the other proponents of this theory, he even hypothesizes that reindeer could be a type of spirit animal for these shaman, like seeing themselves, as a interpretation or an embodiment of the reindeer spirit when they go on these journeys, if you will.
God, who is that? There's this incredible band. I think they're Norse or Icelandic, but they do a lot of really interesting like chant kind of stuff. It's like very much their folk music.
Yeah. I think I might know who you're talking about.
I can never pronounce their name, but they wear a lot of decorative antler stuff. Like I think that's like a pretty common practice in some of those older cultures. They would all wear the decorated antler masks, almost kind of similar to Krampus.
That's what I was about to get at. Yeah, exactly. And maybe that influenced some of that tradition. Who knows? But Ruck is actually the one who draws that Rudolph comparison you've been looking for here.
Oh, here we go.
And he says that his nose looks exactly like a red mushroom. And he, quote, "It's amazing that a reindeer with a red mushroom nose is at the head, leading the others, almost guiding them."
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, I guess my parallel was kind of there, but yes, he's leading the other ones
guide.
because he is the one that consumed the mushroom.
Uh-huh.
Look, scholars, it is what it is, but you kind of got to pay a little bit of attention to the hippies on this one. Because I mean, dude, I 100% understand why people believe this stuff.
Yeah. I mean,
I might be one of them.
Rush believes that the legend of Santa Claus evolved from this historical shamanistic figure that predates all these origin stories of Saint Nick and anyone else that we talked about previously that historians kind of point back to as like, nope, you're wrong because it started with Saint Nick. Because people like Professor Frandy and some of these other historians, they just need that documented proof because nothing else is good for them. But
I just don't, I mean, I'm sorry, like maybe I'm just not a very scholarly person, but I can't completely align with this thing of like, they didn't write it down.
yeah.
I'm sorry, that doesn't mean shit to me.
And I think one of his other big arguments was that this didn't really start to pop up until like the 19th century. This wasn't something that people knew about until the 19th century, which, in the grand scheme of things, that's looking back on it, that's still quite a long ways or long time ago from where we are presently. But his argument was, well, we didn't hear about this until the 19th century, but we've been hearing about old Saint Nick since like the 4th century. And that this well predates anything that we knew about. And just because we heard about it after doesn't mean that they could have been occurring at the same time or even prior to the Saint Nick stuff.
But I also don't understand how the two things could not be a mixture.
Yeah, I completely agree with that because you have the origin, if you will call it, St. Nicholas, if that is the true historical, whatever you want to call it, origin of the Santa Claus being.
Yeah.
But then you have like figures like the Sinterklaas, who was a direct influence from Saint Nick, just kind of through a different cultural lens. You still have like the bishop's robes. He would arrive by boat. He had helper figures, but it was still a different twist on Saint Nick through a different cultural lens. And it wasn't till a visit from Saint Nicholas, which is better known as "'Twas the Night Before Christmas," pretty popular poem if you haven't heard it.
Yeah,
was published in 1823. It wasn't until that poem was published that a lot of these elements of this Santa Claus being the jolly gift giver kind of came into the public sphere. So the argument from the historical standpoint is that we didn't view Santa Claus as having a red robe or being this jolly gift giver until the 1800s. So that's just a weird coincidence that you have this parallel when we didn't start thinking of him in that regard until the 1800s. And, like the modern red suit, white fur Santa that we think about today, a lot of the historians argue that it was really basically commercialism, a lot of advertising, and, Coca-Cola played its big part in kind of cementing the imagery of Santa Claus as we think about him today.
Okay, but so when we have depictions of Santa Claus in pop culture, like the ones that you're referencing right now, where are those guys pulling from the lore? Is it what you were talking about, like the bishops and the robes, and that's kind of why he's wearing these? I mean, he's wearing a coat.
Yeah.
It's not quite like a robe, but that's where my question is, we have kind of let out this whole thing of there's a lot of these different parallels of the red coming from the mushroom, the white coming from the stem, that sort of stuff. Where does modern commercialism pull that from?
Well, I'll get to that very shortly here. And I'm just going to go ahead and tie on a few other things to this argument of the historians before I just completely close the book on that.
Yeah.
And we get back to the fun stuff here.
Sounds good.
Their other big argument on this is that Siberia is not the North Pole from Santa Claus lore, obviously. You think that if that is some sort of origin, that there would be, similar geographic ties to that. But I don't think that matters in the least, because you have all these different other cultural interpretations of Santa Claus that the North Pole really didn't come into the picture until later. So I think that's more on the side of the commercialism design of Santa.
Well, the other thing about it too is immigrants founded this entire country. There's a lot of people from a lot of different places that learned from a lot of different cultures.
Yep. And
brought that to the melting pot.
Exactly. I'll touch on that very shortly. But one of the other arguments, and this kind of ties back to some of this being seen as disrespectful within the Sami culture, is that some of these patches of evidence, if you will, some of these accounts of the urine drinking stories are based on kind of a small number of 18th and 19th century traveler accounts. As I mentioned, they weren't directly from the time of that happening. But I think a lot of these people think that some of these might have been a little bit misunderstood or maybe misinterpreted, and that wasn't the exact way things were going down. Or they just feel that that's kind of an old tradition that they don't want to be tied to their culture. Either way, I could respect that. But they kind of go on to just point out a bunch of examples about the mushroom use in that culture, and that really ties back to secondary and not direct sources, and all kind of traces back to these same few authors that are pushing this theory. You've got Ott, you've got Rush, you've got Wasson. So these are kind of the main sources pushing this theory, not necessarily people that were experiencing that or experiencing part of that culture back in the day. So fine, if that's what they want to write it off as, that's one way to look at it. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Yeah.
They kind of say that mushroom, some of these motifs are going way broader than beyond what they're just talking about. Like even the stuff about going down chimneys, some of that shows up in European folk tales, like supernatural visitors or even witches going down chimneys. And that's not something that's specific to shamans, but it doesn't necessarily rule it out either.
Yeah.
And they also kind of make the argument, and this one I will give to them, that evergreen trees and ornaments are actually part of a broader Germanic and European Yule tradition, which actually predate some of these origins of the mushroom tales, which, sure, I'll give them that. There are ties to Christmas tree decorating and Yule tradition, or Yule tree decorating, I should say. So yeah, from a historian's view, you don't need mushrooms to explain any of that, so they conveniently choose not to believe it, is how I'll put it.
Yeah, I mean, like, I completely understand in some ways where a lot of these thought processes come from, but I also have to think of it too. It's like, I feel like I can't think of an example, and tell me one if you can think of it, but I feel like there's a couple of things that are like weird rituals that people just done that were taking place on one part of the world and taking place in a completely separate part of the world.
Yeah, just like simultaneously occurring without any sort of communication.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's about the most archetypal thing you could think of.
So this gets into the deeper question. Are there things that have driven us to do this whole thing that are built into the software and the archetypes in our minds? And was that because we were freaking put here by aliens?
Man, I don't know. But I mean, I will say that just because history doesn't confirm this, I mean, hell, pretty much everything we talk about on this show, history can't confirm. From ghosts to Bigfoot to anything like that. So like, does that mean it's not worth exploring? I mean,
that's not our style, Austin.
Exactly. But yeah, I guess, if you look at the true technical origins of Santa Claus, that's what the historians want to go by, the St. Nicholas tales. They want to go by these medieval kind of modern day gift bringers, the Cinder Claus. Then you get into stuff like the English Father Christmas. So like, then how do these origins translate over to what we think about as modern day Santa Claus? And as you mentioned it, kind of alluding to the melting pot that is America, in the late 1700s, when Dutch descended families were moving to New York, they would still celebrate either St. Nicholas or Santa Claus, and they were bringing these traditions over to America. And the name Santa Claus is basically like the whitewashed version of Santa Claus, because, I mean, you can figure it out. It sounds basically the same.
Yeah.
And in 1809, Washington Irving's, he basically had like this little satire history of New York, kind of quirky thing that he published. I guess it was a comic. And he basically tried to demonstrate or illustrate St. Nicholas as this kind of quirky, flying, pipe smoking patron of the city. And that's kind of where that imagery started to take place. As I mentioned, that 'Twas the Night Before Christmas was a massive turning point when people really started to associate that imagery that Santa Claus is kind of known for today with him. That's where we kind of get him as this jolly, plump visitor with the sleigh and the 8 flying reindeer, and kind of shifted his arrival to Christmas Eve, not December 6th, which is St. Nicholas Day.
Sure.
So yeah, you're kind of getting a lot of this drawn in from this tradition. And then in the late 19th century, cartoonist Tom Nast draws Santa repeatedly for Harper's Weekly. And this is where Nast kind of alludes to Santa's workshop being at the North Pole. And this is where that comes into play.
Okay.
Later in the elements with that. This is where the toy-making elves come in, the list of naughty and nice children, the kind of things that you do associate with Santa Claus that we might not have just touched on that before. Those kind of come into play with a little bit of artistic liberty. And, the North Pole setting was kind of used more as a way to make Santa belong to everyone, like above national borders. Like he doesn't live in one specific region. He's someone that can travel to the world. Therefore, he lives in this centralized, quote unquote, centralized location of the North Pole.
I mean, that kind of makes sense to me. Where my mind would have gone with that is Santa Claus likes it when it's snowing out. That's how, North America.
Yeah.
So where's the one place he's going to go where there's always snow?
Yep, for sure. So like by 1900, pretty much everything about the modern Santa archetype is already there. And then 20th century rolls around. And of course you get the famous Coca-Cola illustrator, Sunblum, I believe is his name. He started those ads in 1931. So it didn't like officially invent the Santa look, but that's what really kind of kicked it off in that big commercialized aspect of what cemented the image of Santa in the public's mind.
Dude, I'm sorry, but all roads lead to Joshua P. Warren on this podcast. And one time, Warren and I were talking about how there was something to the extent of there were people that had speculated that at the North Pole, there was some sort of entrance to the hollow earth.
Oh, yeah, I've heard this.
Yeah, so, and like he and I were driving up to Western Carolina University and we were talking about this, and he was like, what do you think those people saw when they were flying this plane and saw the entrance to the hollow earth? And I looked over at him and I said, Santa Claus with his shirt off, sunbathing and oiled up. we laughed so hard.
That's a
about
good
that.
one. Yeah. So as you kind of were asking about, you could see where the modern Americanized Santa has kind of come into play here, and where you could trace all that really back to Saint Nick. But like, what about these Santa Claus like influences or archetypes prior to Saint Nick, like before Christmas was celebrated as a Christian holiday? Because we alluded to in some of the other episodes, we know Christmas itself borrows a lot of traditions from what people would kind of refer to as pagan customs, which is, I think, is kind of used as a blanket term to apply to really any spiritual and religious practice that existed before Christianity or even run parallel to Christianity.
Yeah.
Think of things like Greece or Norse mythology is being referred to as paganistic practices. And speaking of, the Christmas season that borrows a ton of influences and tradition, it does borrow a ton of influence and tradition from the Norse season of Yule and its Roman counterpart, Saturnalia, which are both celebrated around the winter solstice. Keep in mind, these are very, very ancient celebrations, very pre-Christmas, very pre-Christianity at the time. And, obviously the word Yule, you've kind of seen that stick around, but in ancient Norse tradition, it's celebrated as the rebirth of the sun and the promise of the earth becoming fertile again, signaling the end of the coldest part of the winter. And similarly, Saturnalia, associated with the ancient Roman festival honoring the god of agriculture, Saturn, easy association. It began as just the single-day event on December 17th, celebrating the end of winter, or the end of the winter planting season, with public rituals and a feast. And over time, the festival expanded to last up for a week and became a period of just public feasting, gift giving, and a bit of social inversion in there. So you could see where the Christmas gift-giving tradition kind of took influence directly from this pagan ancient Roman tradition.
It makes sense. Winter was hard as hell back in the day.
Exactly. One weird tradition from this is actually something known as misrule. Is this something that you're familiar with at all?
Misrule?
Misrule. It comes from the Saturnalia tradition, and it's kind of where people were kind of just given a pass for misbehaving or honestly just being drunken assholes. Most of these customs have basically been shifted to New Year's Eve. So that part of the celebration has been, the debaucherous part has been shifted down to New Year's, which you think about that's the big get drunk and celebrate the new year.
But that also seems a little similar to the mischief that would go on Halloween.
A little bit, yeah. But one part of misrule did actually stick around and influence Christmas tradition that we know today.
Mistletoe?
Wassailing.
Okay, I've heard of this. What is wassailing?
Yeah, so a lot of people think that when they hear that word, it's kind of synonymous with Christmas caroling, which they're not completely wrong on that. Back in the day, it was basically, getting boozed up and going Christmas caroling with a group. However, it was expected that the household that was treated to the song would return the favor by providing more alcohol for your group.
Singing for booze.
Yeah, so you just go house to house. And
I did that in the bluegrass band for 13 years.
You were a professional wassailer.
I was. Holy crap. I should have had cards made.
But, back then, this was like a social contract for houses to provide alcohol to these wassailers, if you will. So houses would basically have just this handy, hot alcoholic cider ready to go for if anyone happened to show up at their house, they'd be ready to provide it for them. And hence the name of the popular holiday drink, wassail.
Dude, I used to go caroling with the people at the church back in the day. I never saw a single Modelo.
In fact, refusal to provide wassail or any sort of gifts in return would lead to the group vandalizing the property before moving on to the next house.
Dude.
So it was misrule. So, they got a pass. But, probably one of the good reasons that the whole tradition of misrule kind of fell out of practice and favor to begin with.
Yeah, it's like, they're already really drunk. I'm not giving them any more booze, but if I don't give them booze, then they're going to mess my house up. Can we just call this off?
Yeah, exactly. So you could kind of see where this tradition from this ancient Roman practice took a little bit of influence into the Christmas caroling tradition, just without the the booze and the vandalism.
I mean, I get it, dude. I'd probably have to have a couple of beers these days to be like out in the walking around singing,
right? Yeah.
singing at my random neighbors like, "Hey, we've never met before, but hope you like Frosty the Snowman. We're really cooking on it this year, baby."
Maybe we should bring wassailing back.
Dude, my neighborhood's perfect for this shit. I actually know some of these folks. They'd probably be like, "Oh my God, they're actually doing this." Okay. Austin and Caleb are drunk.
And we have to provide them more? I don't know.
Jesus Christ. Here's a Budweiser that's been in the fridge for 6 years.
It's Misrule. We get the pass.
You know, we get the one neighborhood where they're like, "Hey, Miss Rule, we love this."
They have bowls of wassail ready to go.
I've been waiting all year for somebody to drunkenly sing at me.
But yeah, that wasn't kind of the only tradition that influenced our Christmas customs from what's known as kind of a pagan practice back then. As I mentioned earlier, decorating the Christmas tree with ornaments was another tradition that was popular in both Yule and the Saturnalia customs. So that is something that maybe wasn't directly influenced from the mushroom story, but who's to say they weren't kind of occurring simultaneously, as you mentioned. But in this case, the ornaments were actually used to honor the god Saturn, or in Yule tradition, the Norse god Odin. And in fact, before St. Nick and Santa Claus, Odin was a pretty popular bearded figure that was honored during the Yule season.
Dope.
He was even known to ride an 8-legged horse through the sky. 8 legs, 8 reindeer.
Oh,
Coincidence?
now that's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm very familiar with Odin because in every single Final Fantasy game, Odin comes down on the horse with 8 legs.
Yeah. I forgot to write his name in here. I think it's. Do you remember it by chance? It's like Sleipnir or something like that.
Oh, the horse?
Yeah.
No, but I do have Google.
There you go. Yeah, it's a cool name. I just couldn't. I forgot to write it down for some reason. But anyways, get this. During the winter, kids would fill their boots with carrots and straw and leave them by the chimney for Odin's horse to feed on. Odin would then fly by and reward the children with small presents and their boots.
So milk and cookies was Americanized versions of carrots.
I mean, I remember they used to sell like reindeer feed. I remember one year my dad had got like a little thing of reindeer feed, which was like a thing of hay. And the next morning it was gone. So I ate that shit up. I was like, they were here.
Okay, so it was Sleipnir, Sleipnir.
That's it.
I don't know exactly how to say that.
I think that's right. I think you nailed it. But I mean,
man, he's a badass. Look at him. That's so cool.
Come on, you can't sit here and tell me the Santa Claus archetype like 100% started with Saint Nick. Like, end story. There's obviously pre-Christian traditions. Odin, in fact, that was the Santa Claus archetype before Saint Nick was even on the radar of anyone.
But think about this again: the Americanized version of Santa Claus. You know, the hallmark, the popular one. This is 100% coming from a bunch of different cultural things.
100%.
They call America the melting pot because it is. Everybody is from everywhere. And that makes total sense that they would be pulling from a bunch of different cultures. And, and multiple people would hear different things. And then you have these artists that are like, okay, well, from all the different stuff I've heard over time, I'm going to give my artistic interpretation of what Santa Claus probably looks like. And then, you know, a couple of instances of what these artist renderings are become the modern day red cloaked, sleigh flying Santa.
Exactly. So like you said, like elements of this have existed across cultures for years. And just because it wasn't directly documented in ancient times doesn't mean that some of these elements weren't coming from the psychedelic theory. You know, who's to say that this archetype wasn't being practiced through traditions of the mushroom trip, you know, simultaneously alongside these other traditions from ancient Norse and Roman cultures? Just because one thing's true doesn't make the other false.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that ultimately I have a hard time writing this off as complete bullshit. I think that there's too many parallels that come across here, and whether it directly influenced what became the European tradition of Saint Nick and to Santa Claus, or whether it was just some sort of archetype that existed and maybe provided influence into it later, or through a different medium. Who knows? But I think there's too many parallels to completely write this one off.
I'm right there with you, man. It just, the what you said a minute ago, the whole thing, one thing being true doesn't make another thing false.
Yeah.
That is an incredibly good point to make in this whole thing, because it doesn't even make sense to me that American Santa Claus just comes from one place.
No.
Like one line of thinking about it, just, and it all coming from Saint Nick. I mean, I understand people wanting to acknowledge the importance of who Saint Nick was.
Yeah, and I think that's what ties the Santa Claus entity to the practice of Christianity. So there is a bit of a thread that people might want to prod a little harder than others.
Yeah, but oh man, I tell you what, this episode, I'm telling people at home because it's true. I've literally been sitting on the edge of my seat because I've been so interested in this. I mean, it's so fun. It's so cool to think about this stuff. And to be perfectly honest with you, man, whether Christmas and all of the cultures or whatever, whether any of this actually came from the things that you're talking about tonight, you know, the symbology and the tradition of the consumption of psychedelics and the subsequent consumption of reindeer urine, whether that all is what it is, the conversation itself is incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
And for me, it kind of makes me like it even more. Like, I love that there is this debate about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of fun because it makes another mystery for us to look into. I mean, I know that you've done about as damn far as you can, but you never know what other things could pop up in the future.
Oh, for sure.
There's all kinds of, discoveries of settlements. Maybe one day they will find something that was written about it.
Exactly. That's what I'm getting at, is there's so much that hasn't been discovered in this world that who's to say we won't find some tie to this. And I think just me diving into this, I keep going back to the idea of Santa Claus as an archetype, and it just exploring this really reinforced that in my mind, and I guess belief in a weird way. Because you asked me a few weeks ago, like, if I believe in Santa Claus as a kid, and I kind of had like that weird relationship with it where I almost like wanted to and kind of like chose to believe in Santa.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go ahead and add on to that, say, I think I do still believe in Santa, but as an archetype that kind of like represents or reminds people of the good in humanity, especially like during these colder, darker times when some, if not all people, could kind of use a little pick-me-up sometimes. Because, when you look back at it, it's kind of bigger than just one person. And I think that's kind of the whole idea of Santa Claus to begin with.
I think that's a very eloquent way to look at it. And I think in some people's mind, Bigfoot is very much the same way.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of people out there that they haven't looked at the stuff that like people like my bro and Cliff Barrickman have looked at in the evidence. And to them, Bigfoot is just this mythology that is really fun and really cool. But to some, maybe out there. But who knows, man?
Yeah, for sure. And to tie on to that, I did actually find an article that somewhat backs up my standpoint, or maybe not backs it up, but at least shares that standpoint with me and almost validated it enough to at least share with everyone on this. Because it's an article I found titled, "Is Santa Claus Real? A Deeper Look at the Science and Spirit of Christmas." And it was just published a year ago in Collectivism, but no authors listed. So I don't know who to credit. Really wish I did, because it's a really good read if you want to find it yourself. But overall, the kind of summary of it argues that Santa Claus is in fact an archetype, a cross-cultural, benevolent gift giver, this pattern that shows up, whether it's in figures like Saint Nick, Odin, Santa Claus, across various cultures. And the article kind of goes on to use quantum physics metaphors, kind of going into like stuff like entanglement, to suggest that Santa Claus exists as a collective consciousness or social reality sustained by a shared belief or behavior. And from an evolutionary or psychological standpoint, teaching kids about Santa is really a way to reinforce pro-social behavior, generosity, or social cohesion, which really does have real-world benefits.
There you go. Yeah, it's like we fight all the time. At a moment's notice, we're ready to get into an argument with a stranger. But Santa Claus really kind of is this beacon of this time of year where we all kind of a little bit stop being a little bit
Right.
of an asshole, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really, really interesting. Oh man, yeah, that kind of I'm kind of going into strange, deep places in my mind that I don't really want to talk about because,
Fair.
well, what I will say is like people coming together after tragedies.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But this is this thing to where it's not something that is a remembrance of something bad. It's a remembrance of something good. It's a remembrance of like humanity and
Exactly.
and that is kind of a rare thing this day and age.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. A reminder that the world isn't as bad of a place as you might feel in your own mind.
Yeah, dude. Good God, this has landed on a hopeful
Yeah.
note.
Right? Merry Christmas, everyone.
No, I mean, honestly, that is like,
Yeah, I mean, this is another. I mean, I feel like this is another way just to share the same impactful message that Marley and the Three Ghosts share, and the old Dickens tale. Is
yeah,
that,
don't be a Dickens.
hey, you nailed it.
Wow, dude. All right, well,
Yeah, I don't have too much to add on that one. I think that kind of wraps it up. I will just leave it with this, that I think that a lot of the elements that we talk about on the show, from ghosts to cryptids to UFOs or non-human entities, they could really fall into the same kind of archetypal category in a lot of ways. So from that standpoint, like, I'm going to say that Santa Claus is as real as anything that we talk about on the show, and I stand by that.
boom. I mean, as we said on our episode about Krampus, you cannot have one without the other.
Hey, the
If
yin to the yang.
Exactly. You've got the light and the dark.
Yeah,
Both a massive archetypal part of the human psyche.
yeah, for sure.
But dude, I love this idea, and I love this exploration into these different potential facets into something that we don't, as a society, I think, ever really question.
Yeah.
Do you think the average person sits down and goes, I wonder where the hell we came up with Santa Claus?
You
and
know,
where all this came from?
I was thinking about that the other day because, we've talked about the movie Klaus that we feel has kind of become a classic for both of our households.
Yeah.
That really kind of has a different twist on the origin tale of Santa Claus. And I think when I found that movie 5-6 years ago, whenever it came out, that really kind of set my mind down that rabbit hole of like, man, I've never really thought about the different cultural origins of Santa Claus. And I think that's what really sparked my curiosity on it. So when you brought up this topic to me, I'm like, yep, all over it.
Sign me up.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, when I heard about the theory, I was like, that's just too weird to not look into.
Yeah. And I mean, you have these ties to what is these red cap mushrooms that are associated with other mythological beings, whether it's the Fae, whether it's gnomes, or I guess Mario himself.
Oh, hell yeah. Mario when he's in gnome mode before
Right.
before he eats the mushroom.
Yeah, there you go. And that's what.
What does Nintendo know about the magic of the mushroom that they have
Probably a lot.
they've been trying to tell us since 1980?
Maybe so.
Buddy, let me tell you. Number one, this has been one of the most bizarrely fascinating episodes we've
Yeah.
done in a minute. Like,
I don't think there's anything spooky or scary about it, but it's been fascinating nonetheless.
well, hey, we're ghosts in the mountains, but we don't always have to be spooky and scary. I think that, the point of the podcast, I like that we're folklore, we're paranormal, and we're history, and kind of whatever the hell else we want to be.
And this kind of meets or checks all the boxes, if you will.
Yeah, but dude, this conversation was so incredibly interesting to me. And brother, I think I tell you pretty frequently, but I'm going to tell you again, you're one hell of a researcher, brother.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. This one was a pure joy to look into for my part.
That makes me happy to hear, man. And I have just had so much fun checking this one out. But on that note, all wonderful, magical things typically must come to an end.
But not Christmas yet. We still have one more week of that.
I was just talking about the end of the episode.
I know.
But, I hope that everybody out there has been able to enjoy going on this wild ass ride with us. And maybe this will spark some people to look deeper into this whole thing and find some stuff that, potentially adds some credence to one side, maybe adds some credence to another part of the argument. I don't know. I think the ongoing efforts into looking into this are going to be fascinating.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, there's still so much to be discovered about this world. To think that we know all that we ever will about ancient civilization is pretty naive.
Yeah, and also, I think what's so cool about it too is we're going deeper into ourselves, into our ancestors, into our history, looking for these answers of things that are kind of, commonplace and face value for us. And we look into the different dimensions and the ghosts and the paranormal and the cryptids and interdimensional beings like Mothman potentially all the time. But we don't always go so far into our own psyche about things that have essentially become these, archetypal imaginary friends of ours that we see all the time and don't really think too much about. Maybe the answer is actually really deep into the psyche.
Mushrooms.
In the software that was brought to us by the aliens that seeded us on this planet. I don't know if I necessarily believe that theory, but buddy, let me tell you, next week, we might get a little bit closer to that answer.
And I cannot wait.
That said, if you want to learn more about what we do, you can go to ghostsinthemountains.com. If you'd like to support the program and get an ad-free version of the podcast, you can subscribe to us on Patreon. But as always, everybody, thanks so much for listening. We hope you are having a very happy holiday. Have a good night and stay spooky, everybody. Austin, you've ruined Christmas for me.
What?
I'll tell you why. Christmas was made up by a bunch of people drinking reindeer piss. Oh my God.
You didn't like your glass? Man, I'm feeling great right now.
Look, I tell you what, I've drank a lot of reindeer piss in my day, and this actually is probably the best one.
Okay.
It reminded me of the Alkaline Trio lyric. I have pages of dreams. They're covered in piss. I'm just kidding. You could never ruin Christmas for me until, maybe if you shot me on Christmas or something, but I highly doubt that'll happen.
Yeah.
I'm going to knock on wood and never buy you a gun.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and say that's pretty low probability.
Don't kill me, bro.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everybody. We love you. Good night.